My computer, I might have to call you. My printer says everything it's supposed to say. My computer says everything it's supposed to say. But they can't do this.
Well, is your printer at home or is your printer here?
It's at home. I can call you. Don't shoot yourself between minutes.
Do my best.
John 17, part 2. First 5 verses, Jesus is praying for himself, that he will glorify the Father. And how did we say one glorifies the Father? By doing what the Father has asked us to do. That's what brings glory to his name. People are always coming up with all kinds of things that they're exclaiming that they're serving God. And that first one thing and then another. The only thing that pleases God is when we do what he wants us to do. It's sort of like with parents and kids. It's sort of like with you know how when Saul didn't do what he said he was supposed to do? And he tries to say, oh, yeah, I did the Lord's will. And to paraphrase Samuel, he basically says, you know, it's better to do what God says than to come up with your own plans. And so Jesus kept exactly what he was supposed to do. And in that, he brings glory to the Father. Now, starting with verse 6, we have the apostles for being prayed for. And he has demonstrated to them in his life the relationship that he has with the Father. And they've seen this. And they've even had that moment in 14, 15, and 16 where they're having more conversation and where Philip kind of blurts out, well, if you show us the Father, it'll be enough for us. And but then when you're so long, Philip, and you don't know who I am, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So he prays for them because they're going to be going through, well, a lot of strife. Apparently, all of them but John were executed. John probably dies in exile. So none of them had an easy path. And most of them who died are dying far away from their homeland, where they've gone out into all the world to preach the gospel. So they're not even dying in familiar surroundings, many of them. And so Jesus has them on his heart. And he says in verse 11, I'm no longer in the world, and yet they themselves are in the world. And I come to you, Holy Father, keep them in your name, the name which you have given me, that they may be one, even as we are one. That last part of the verse comes back when he starts praying for us, those who believe on Jesus through the word of the apostles that has come down to us. So, the name thing, that's a big deal. Talking about the significance of a signet. And God has put his seal on us. We are owned by him. His name represents who he is, his identity. Same as Jesus' identity. And the Holy Spirit's identity. And as John 16 taught in 13 through 15, that Jesus took from the Father and he's given it to the Spirit, and the Spirit's going to give it to them. That's what we have. A Spirit-given word. It doesn't mean anything other than what God intended for it to mean. It's supposed to work together to explain itself rather than our taking out little bits and pieces and saying, okay. No, what does God have in mind? But he wants them to stay as one. Now, they're going to be scattered, so in a sense, visibly being able to see them as one, human beings, it's not really going to be possible after a while. But God can see it. And they're staying as one in purpose, one behind the name that represents who God is a huge deal. Verse 12. While I was with them, I was keeping them in your name, which you've given me, and I guarded them. Not one of them perished, but the son of perdition, so that the scripture may be fulfilled. So Jesus had kept them together. And now they're going out on their own. But now I come to you. These things I speak in the world, so that they may have my joy made full in themselves. They were dreading when he talked about his death. In fact, he said in 16:12, I want to talk to you about more things, but I can't until we get what we know would be his death and resurrection behind them. The resurrection changed everything. And their joy would be made full. Can you imagine, especially, I think when they're locked up in a house, women have got more courage, as we noted. They actually go to the tomb and come back and talk to them. And Peter and John go right into the tomb. Simon Peter, the youthful John, runs ahead of him. But then, they're all in the house. And he walks through. Now, some people say, well, he must have had a special body to do that. No. He walked on water with the body that he had. And the body that he has that he shows to them, it's got holes in it. So it's not whatever Paul is talking about when he says, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, we will all be changed. And this mortal will put on immortality. Because John, in 1 John 3, 1 beginning, says we won't know what that's like till we see him as he is. So that part of it we're waiting for. And it'll be, we can only get little glimpses of it when they're described to us in human terms. But it's going to be a very wonderful thing. Well, they're going to be so full of joy when they see that Jesus isn't dead, that he arose from the dead. It's going to be, it's the game changer. It's the life changer. And hence they go out. And they're not afraid of death anymore. I don't think they wanted to die or anything like that. And they probably had some kind of horrific ways of dying. But they knew that death was not the end. And they knew that Jesus had conquered death. Paul, when he talks about the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15, asked, where's the sting? And other than Jesus, it's a sting. And you feel, well, you know how you feel when you go to a gravesite. You feel totally helpless. There's absolutely nothing you can do. If you could do anything to bring somebody back, you do it. But you can't. But Jesus did. And when he arose, and when he spent 40 days with them after the resurrection, before his ascension, they just were getting fortified for what was ahead of them. He says in verse 15, I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. For they're not of the world, even as I am not of the world. He tells them that they're going to run into adversity because he ran into adversity. And they're going to be like him, so people are going to react to them the way that they reacted to him. We live in more civilized times. We don't have arenas and coliseums and crucifixions and cutting our head off. And yet, there's a point, if you get a chance to Google it up, when Jesus came to Birmingham. Of course, if you were in England, it would be Birmingham. And the gist of it is, he comes to England. I think it's probably about the 1800s or something. And he wanders around. And nobody pays the least bit of attention to him. You can't get anybody to listen to him. You can't get anybody to give him any mind, if you will. And the end of the poem talks about he longed for Calvary. At least people paid attention to him. At least he made a difference. At least people had to make a decision. Our culture is one where folks put off decisions, making life-changing decisions. They get caught up in all kinds of things to sort of keep them from having to face the implications of what Jesus is asking for in discipleship. And so we face something that in some ways is more frustrating. It's painful, but we can be ignored. And, oh, yeah, right, you've got your belief. I remember after I became a Christian, I felt I needed to go to everybody in my mother's family. My father's family didn't talk to each other, so I couldn't go to them. So I thought I needed to go to everybody on my mother's side of the family and tell them my story. In the almost to a word, I'm glad you found what works for you. And that was just so like, oh, thanks a lot. And sort of like, bless your heart, you got something now, we're happy for you, but we don't need anything. And we face a lot of that, but there are still people who are looking. There are people who have convince themselves that the American dream it can be a nightmare, and that putting our faith and trust in things will always disappoint us to some point, because things don't get resurrected. Moth and rust and whatnot have their way with them. Now, verse 20, as promised, we get brought into this. I do not ask on behalf of these alone, but for those who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. There it is again. He's interested in that. Even as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that the world may believe it, so that the world may believe that you sent me. What is there are two things Jesus talks about. The other one's in chapter 13, 34 and 35. But the builder of the church, the head of the church, Jesus, gives us two things that are particularly important to him. And as I've mentioned before, it flabbergasted me. I've heard, and you have too, I'm sure, any number of lessons on the identity of the church. And often it centers on what we do in buildings, which frankly is the smallest part of it. I never heard, it hit me one day, have these moments where hidden in plain sight and it kind of gets you, and you beat yourself up because why did I see that? It's been there for years and years and years. Well, Jesus says in John 13, 34 and 35, by this will all men know that you are my disciples. Okay, so how is everybody going to know? If we love each other like he loved us. Pretty straightforward. We need to learn what that's about. Reading the Gospels helps us see that, fleshes it out, if you will. And we get to see him in action and what's important to him and what he likes and what he doesn't like. But then here, he says that if we'll be united. And he's not talking about some ecumenical, let's just agree to disagree. There are some things we can do that with that don't really matter. Matters of opinion and judgment. Who cares? If you're a Yankees fan, well, maybe that does matter. But those things don't matter. I've seen congregations where there was strife over football teams. Alabama and Auburn.
Who?
You're talking about the orange and blue one, aren't you? Saban. I put a thing on Facebook today. He was before Congress testifying about the NIL stuff, And one of the main reasons he got out of coaching, he said, was because it was destroying the game. And what do you think of him? I think he was a great coach. And I think he's actually probably a pretty good man, all things considered. But he said that he and his wife, they had a relationship with the football players. They'd have them over to the house. They were like their family. And they both felt that part of the responsibilities that they had was to cause them to grow up to be successful men in the world. There's a lot of times they're coming there and they don't have much of a background and all of that. And so they're trying to cultivate in them. And that's not the only coach that's done it. Dare I mention another Alabama coach, perhaps Bear Bryant, who had his own problems. But he loved his players and he wanted them to be successful in the world. When I first came to Montgomery to go to school in 1968, they had a Suge Jordan show and a Bear Bryant show. And that was sort of like everybody watched those things on Sunday and they talk about the games. And one of the things that the Bear often talked about was, we got to show more class than that. Got to show more class than that. And Saban got upset because Alabama could have won that semifinal game if they'd have called the penalty on roughing the kicker that they should have, but they didn't, and that's all part of the game. They may well have won. But they were throwing their helmets down and doing all kinds of things. And he said, that was a contributing factor to me saying, it's time for me to get out. He said, they didn't learn that in this program. That's not what we're about. So having some class. Well, if we love as Jesus loved, and we are one, not in some way, we'll just agree to disagree, but we have some values, some things that we commonly share that hold us together. And in our differences that don't really matter, those things don't come between us. We're welded together as a family. And Jesus says that's going to cause people to believe that the Father sent the Son. Otherwise, we have no real credibility. We kick it along with ourselves. What business do we have asking somebody else to come in here and join the diversity that's unhealthy? So, we have this prayer coming to us now. The glory which you have given me, I've given them, so they may be one, just as we are one. I and them, and you and me, to be perfected in unity, that the world may believe that you send me, even as you have loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, be with me where I am. He wants us to join him. What does he say at the beginning of the conversation in 14? I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will return again to receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Now, he knows the glories of heaven. One of the first things he says in this prayer in John 17 is he wants to go back where he was. I can understand that. We can't imagine how much better heaven was than earth, and what he sacrificed to mess with us, a bunch of yahoos who often are very hard to manage. You know how we are. So he wants us to be with him throughout eternity. And that shows something about his love. Even though the people who hadn't even been born yet, us, he wants us to be with him. And the joy that he has, he wants us to be able to share that joy. John talks about that in 1 John. When he's talking about people he wants to be in fellowship. He says, our fellowship is with the Father, with his Son, Jesus Christ. Make our joy complete by joining us. Be part of that. Be linked up to it. Then, verse 25. O righteous Father, although the world has not known you, yet I have known you. These have known you, that you sent me. And I have made your name known to them, that I make it known, so that the love with which you love me may be in them, and I in them. That seems kind of important to him, doesn't it? I in them, and they in me. That's our privilege, to make room, clean house, give rid of ourselves, self-denial, so that Jesus can fill us up, and we'll be representing him with the things that he showed the world. In our imperfections, yes, but people being able to see that, hey, we're authentic, we try, we mean this, it's serious to us, and we want to be Jesus people. That's the privilege that he gives us to represent him. And the prayer right before he's getting arrested, right before he's going to get beaten to pieces and go through all these mock trials, he's thinking about us because he loves us. So there. Thank you. Okay, we'll turn on. If